Hi, I'm Dr. Salcedo, your conscious gynecologist. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a board-certified OBGYN and certified nutrition network practitioner. I focus on the root cause of gynecologic disease and optimizing women's health. Today we're going to be talking about how certain plants, fruits, and maybe what you think of as vegetables, these little anti-nutrients, these proteins called lectins, can actually make endometriosis symptoms worse than what a lot of people realize, and I'm going to actually help you understand how they cause havoc in our bodies. Women with endometriosis often have intestinal bloating and pain around their period. They often describe constipation and diarrhea, particularly during their menstrual cycle, but after intercourse or having any kind of meals at all, they describe this bloating. And so we know that endometriosis is a gut microbiome disorder. We know that certain inflammation molecules that breach the connections, the protective connections in our intestines, cause leakage of inflammatory molecules into the deep sections of our pelvis, and they activate our immune system and cause a lot of this scarring and bloating that a lot of women with endometriosis experience. Then, when women with endometriosis have their menstrual cycle, their blood comes out through the vagina, as we know, but it also comes out through the fallopian tubes. When it comes out through the fallopian tubes, it sits in the area of chronic inflammation that has already been impacted by the gut inflammation. And that's really what makes endometriosis worse. And that's actually the reason why women who had their uterus removed for endometriosis still describe endometriosis symptoms. So that's kind of the basis of what endometriosis is. Let's talk about how lectins make it worse. So what is lectin? Lectin's actually a plant protein. It behaves like an anti-nutrient, and it's found in the skin of certain fruits, what we think of as vegetables, and legumes. Now, the reason why I say what we think of as vegetables is because many people think that cucumbers and squash and tomatoes are vegetables, but actually they're a fruit. So any plant that has skin on the outside with its seeds inside is actually considered a fruit. Well, plants and fruits are really just like any other living organism, and they're trying to increase their genetic variability all across the environment. Now, when a certain fruit, or commonly thought of as a vegetable, or legumes have higher lectin content, that means the seed inside it is not ready to be fertilized and brought to the rest of the world. And so it actually has higher lectin content, which is much more inflammatory, and I'll get to that later. A more ripe fruit or a well-processed legume has less of that lectin content. It has a seed within it, and that will be able to get through your intestinal processing and be released into the environment for plant propagation. Okay, so that's the first piece about lectins. So why does this actually cause a problem? Well, lectins are incredibly inflammatory to your intestines, and I'm going to share with you why. But if you're interested in this, you like this video, you're learning a little bit, go ahead and like, subscribe, share with a friend so that we can get this information to women so they don't feel so alone. So how does lectin damage our body? Well, it does it in about 3 different ways. And there's a really very amazing cardiothoracic surgeon who actually trained and did a lot of work at Loma Linda University and wrote this book called The Plant Paradox, which describes a lot of this information about how plants can be really inflammatory. So lectins damage our bodies in 3 different ways. So the first is it actually damages the gut wall, the intestinal walls. Lectins disconnect the tight junctions between our intestinal wall cells, and when they do this, they actually bind to certain cell receptors that increase the production of a molecule called zonulin. Zonulin opens the spaces of the intestinal lining and allows lectins and other inflammatory and bacterial pieces to go into our system, into our lymphatic system, into our blood, into our pelvic cavity. and that causes inflammation. Once they get there, they actually activate our immune system in a negative way. Now, when we have activation chronically in our immune system, it's kind of like getting a paper cut over and over and over. If you had a paper cut and I was able to, get a paper cut and you are noticing a little bit of swelling at your skin, and in about a day or two, the paper cut will get better. But if I gave you a paper cut at the same spot over and over and over, that area will never heal. And that's kind of like how your intestines receive that inflammation from lectins, because zonulin opens up the gaps of your intestines and allows inflammation to leak through. Now, molecular mimicry and toll-like receptors. What lectins do once they get into your bloodstream, they actually activate something called the toll-like receptor on our immune cells, and that causes hyperactivation of our immune system. This activation of the toll-like receptor has been highly associated with the chronic inflammation of endometriosis. And so we know that lectins directly contribute to this inflammation seen in endometriosis. Now, the last thing is that lectins in wheat, called wheat germ agglutination or WGAs, these lectins bind to the insulin receptor, causing insulin resistance. Now, why would nature do that? Well, if we know that certain people of ethnic groups of northern climates, in the northern areas, they relied heavily on wheat in order to help increase their weight during the summertime, because in the wintertime, we know that there's going to be less food and food is less plentiful, and so we'll be fasting more. And so foods higher in WGA or lectin or whole wheat kinds of grains increase insulin resistance by binding to the insulin receptor. WGA binds to the insulin receptor, causing insulin resistance and weight gain. It's a biologic adaptation, but right now we live in a civilization where food is so plentiful, we don't really have to follow the diurnal patterns anymore of how we used to cultivate food and fast and things. It's just not our modern civilization anymore. And so if we're eating out of our seasonal patterns, we are more inclined to get this weight gain related to lectins. So what's the plan? What's the good news in all of this? Does this mean that we have to give up plants? Does this mean that we have to give up the vegetables and the fruits that we really enjoy and the grains? Because I know what you're thinking. This is probably really hard for people who are vegan or vegetarian. But the good news is that there's a few things that we can do to make this a little easier for our intestines. Now, if you've got really serious endometriosis, a lot of times I recommend patients to just avoid lectins in general if they're open to that, if they are a little bit more open to animal-based diets. We know that lectins found in beans, legumes, nightshades, which are eggplants and potatoes, tomatoes, blueberries, anything with the skin, cause that inflammatory release for some people who are really sensitive. So the first thing is you may just need to avoid them. But if that's not possible, or you still want to include them in your diet a little bit, then use a pressure cooker. When we use and when we process beans, many of the beans that are canned have actually been really well pressurized so that the lectin content is removed. Or in our older cultures, or actually maybe you might still do this, soaking dry beans and pouring out the fluid removes a lot of the lectin content, especially an overnight soak, which you really should do that with dry beans because it removes the lectin content and causes less of the gas. But also using your pressure cooker and removing the distillate, the fluid from the pressure cooker after you process your beans is a really great way to decrease your lectin content. Also, peeling your vegetables and fruits, taking off the skin. Cultures that are very culinary heavy, like Italian and French, know this. They know that eating the skin on certain fruits and vegetables causes a lot of bloating and irritation. And so, so those are really good, easy things that you can do to improve the inflammation that's related to lectins and endometriosis. So here's the challenge. If you have endometriosis, consider a lectin-free diet for 2 weeks. See what happens. maybe we will see an improvement in your endometriosis symptoms, just like many women who avoid gluten, because gluten is a cousin of lectin. It's very related to a lot of this inflammation that we see. And so what if you're avoiding gluten and you're doing pretty good on endometriosis diet? Now I would challenge you to avoid lectin and see what happens. Let me know how it goes. Well, if you found this video helpful, go ahead and like and subscribe. I'm going to go ahead and put Dr. Gundry's book in the show notes. I think it's very interesting, and I think it really will help a lot of women who are on their journey to the root cause treatment of endometriosis and other gynecologic disease. Thanks for watching.